We're staying with our same subtitle, but we're moving on now to the Southern advantages and disadvantages in the war. So the main Southern advantage is that they are fighting a defensive war. So that means that they know the territory. People are more likely to respond and join their army because they're defending their own homes. They have the general support of the population in that area, and they just have to keep the North from invading them too much and taking over too much. So it's generally an easier war to fight than the North has or the Union has. They also think that they can make the North eventually lose interest. So some already in the North simply just want to split the Union and be done with it, not bother fighting the war. So they think if they can drag it out for just long enough, then they are going to get the North to just give up and go home and quit. In fact, they're almost right. They also have superior generals. So they have a lot more military academies in the South. In fact, I think 7 out of the 8 major military academies at this time were located in the South. And that also leaves the North at a disadvantage because the North is relying on the already existing American army, and they lose 90% of their officers, or about 80 to 90% of their officers, to the South when the South secedes, because the majority of the officers in the military were from the South, and they leave when the South secedes. They also have generally higher morale because they have something to fight for. They are fighting to defend their homes, and they know what they are going to lose if they lose this war. Whereas the North isn't necessarily fighting for something for a lot of the war, they're just fighting against losing the South. And so if they lose, they're not going to lose that much because the South has already seceded. So they have kind of a higher morale, more interest in winning the war, more devoted into it. They also have pretty high food supply and general raw goods. So they have all that cotton, which comes in handy when you're, making clothes for an army. But they also have a lot of beef coming over from areas like Texas and other, food supply coming from like Texas and Louisiana. The problem is, though, that they don't have the transportation network that the North has. So they have a much harder time transporting those goods to their troops than the North has. We'll get back to that in just a second. But the South turns out to be pretty resourceful. They actually end up opening a lot of facilities in the South to create weapons and ammunition and other things that the Army needs. So they kind of adapt to their situation, even though things don't look great for a while. Now, the Southern disadvantages. These are also quite a lot. Even though they are resourceful, they do lack the industrial infrastructure that the North already has in place. So they're working from scratch to create everything for the Army and create the factories and the facilities that they need to manufacture all of those goods. Whereas the North already has that in place and can just convert those to making other things if the Army needs something in particular. They generally have low war supplies because of this. And especially at the beginning of the war, they're going to have to rely on people to bring their own weapons or purchase them from elsewhere because they cannot manufacture them. So that's going to be a constant problem for the South, to the point where sometimes soldiers are actually going into battle without any weapons whatsoever. The Navy can also blockade the South, which is a major problem for the South because during wartime, you need your economy to keep going, and a lot of their economy is trading with other countries, particularly Europe. And if the Navy is blockading them, they cannot purchase any goods from outside of the country, so they can't purchase the things that they need to fight the war, and they also cannot make money by sending things out to other countries. Again, we're back to the low transportation that the South has. This kind of acts weirdly as both an advantage and a disadvantage for them. So it's an advantage because they don't have the roads that the North can use to invade them, but it's a disadvantage because they cannot transport their troops as easily and transport things to their troops. They also have a much lower population in the South, so they're just going to have a harder time keeping up with the rate of this war. But it's important to note that both sides think this war is going to be over very, very quickly.